We have a wonderful opportunity to see many, many, many pinnipeds, and maybe you all can visit some of them when you are here in person in San Diego next year. So enough about me. Let's dive into the reason we're all here and the creatures that are much cuter than I am. Speaking of, excuse me, Southern California, this beauty was resting on the La Jolla Cove just weeks ago. Went down there to check out some pinnipeds and get some good footage for the presentation, see how they're doing. And this is just one of the many adorable creatures that would await you and be there to enjoy if you took a side trip next year. So when we talk about these creatures, we could get very fancy and talk about the family Odoridae and the Phocidae and the Odobenidae. But I mean, let's be real. We're really just talking about the awesome pinnipeds and, you know, the California sea lions and harbor seals and amazing walruses of the world. And when we look at these creatures, they definitely, each of these families have their own unique nuances, but they're also all in the same suborder and order. And so they share a lot of things in common. And you notice that they're all in order Carnivora, which is kind of interesting because you don't really think of all of these creatures as being closely related to dogs, cats, bears, raccoons, all of those. But they are in that order. And so they have some of the same traits and adaptations that those do as well. So when we talk about the otariids, we're talking about the sea lions and the fur seals, also known as eared seals. When we talk about the phocids, we're talking about the earless seals, no external ear, that is. And we're not going to talk about walruses today, but it's worth a deep dive on your own because they are truly, truly amazing creatures. But when we think of the pinnipeds in general, you know, it's interesting because evolution spent so much time getting animals out of the water in ways to conserve and take water with you and amniotic eggs and let's survive on land and conquer land. The interesting thing is pinnipeds evolved from terrestrial mammals. So they evolutionarily made it on land. And then they were like, you know what? Maybe we should go back. And granted, it wasn't a conscious thought, but evolution will work to fill any niche that is available or not fully filled in any ecosystem. So if everybody is moving on to land to conquer land, and there are niches still available in the ocean where you would minimize competition and be able to get more resources, then why not move on back into the ocean and go ahead and fill some of those? Now, moving back into the ocean, of course, leads to their food choice of preference. And these are definitely carnivores. They eat lots and lots of fish, love octopus, squids, but basically pescatarians, 100%. You know, there's a difference between a carnivore and what we call a hyper carnivore. Any carnivore that gets over 70% of its food, its protein from meat is called a hypercarnivore, and pinnipeds take this to an extreme. They get 100% of their nutrition from meat. In fact, if they ever even have a bit of seaweed enter their stomach, it was surely a horrible accident because it was stuck to a fish, and their stomach's probably not thrilled about it because they don't have any enzymes that digest cellulose. They are all meat all the time. Don't ever need to delve into a lovely sea salad or what you will. Now, if you think about if you've ever seen a seal or sea lion eat, you're talking about a creature that will grab a fish with its teeth. It's not going to use hands or anything, doesn't have those adaptations, and pretty much going to gulp it whole. So when we start to think of those carnivoran relatives that have these lovely skulls and those carnassial teeth, you may notice those carnassial teeth there that are, let me get a spotlight here, those shearing teeth right there. You know, got our incisors, canines, and then those slicing teeth, which are the reason that every rawhide bone we give a dog goes straight to the side of the mouth. Well, those are not present in the pinnipeds. The pinnipeds have their canines, and then every tooth after that is what we call homodont, the same. They don't need to shear, they don't need to slice. They're basically going to grab a fish, gulp it down, hopefully grab another and another and another, and continue to gulp it down. No shearing, no slicing needed. So these lovely carnassials that some of their distant relatives have are not present in the pinnipeds, and some of them take it to a big extreme when you talk about walruses, and you just basically have little peg-like teeth, and then of course those two huge modified canines that are modified into tusks. So no carnassial teeth here, but they are not missing out on anything. They just simply don't need them at all. They have all the teeth they need for their unique diet. As if cool teeth and the ability to get all of that food is not awesome enough, they are super amazing swimmers, divers, extremely flexible and agile, especially in the water. Sometimes, of course, all that swimming, you got to just take a break though. So along the coast of California, it's not uncommon, especially with sea lions, to see some that have just hauled out to take a break, usually on a buoy or someone's boat or the shore, maybe an oil rig. So even though they're definitely aquatic creatures, you do see them on land. And again, with the sea lions, sometimes it's just to take a snooze. But for a lot of the pinnipeds, the big mass gatherings are definitely related to the breeding and the pupping season. A lot of these creatures are completely solitary the rest of the year out in the ocean. But when they gather together, and when I say gather together, sometimes it's in serious mass gatherings, it is to maximize the breeding, reproduction, and survival of the species. So this is actually up the coast of California, about halfway up California in San Simeon. These are northern elephant seals. This is not something you can see year-round. They prefer to be out in the ocean, but they do come in from about late November to late February, and they all breed, pup, and gather in this area for this big reproductive tradition that they have year after year. They are definitely polygynous. The males will try to mate with as many of the females as possible, but it is certainly an amazing sight to see that you can go see every year. So I don't know that the conference next year times well with that, so maybe another side trip on your own in the future. So even though so many of these are almost purely aquatic, they are coming out on land to have their pups. They do not give birth in the ocean. So whether you are at the extreme latitudes up in the Arctic Circle or down in Antarctica, and therefore like this harp seal, you're going to give birth on an ice shelf or an ice floe, or maybe you live in more tropical, subtropical areas and you actually have nice coasts where you can come on land and give birth on a nice sandy shore. You are doing that on land, not in water. The mating and the pupping happens on land there. Now, it's funny because sometimes humans will find lovely places along the shore that they love, and they're like, you know, this would be a perfect spot for humans to gather and have picnics and recreation, and oh, look at the ocean, this is just so beautiful, we should make this, you know, a preserve for recreation for humans. And then some of the pinnipeds will go, you know what, look what they did for us, this is phenomenal, they gave us picnic tables, we're going to use them as bunk beds, they're so thoughtful, those humans. And this is in this picture video is in Cape Cross in Namibia. So it's the Atlantic coast on Namibia there. And it is the largest single colony of fur seals in the world at peak breeding season. There are 210,000 fur seals that come on land in this area. You can see from the archaic tables there and all of the sand on the quote unquote floor. This was designed as a human recreation site that these seals thought was certainly delightful and have made full use of. And as this little tiny pup on the right here walks up to us, look how adept on land this little one is, thanks to the fact that he is a fur seal and those back flippers can move up under his body.
Hi. Hi.
Now, granted, we don't want to approach wildlife, but in my defense, he approached me. I was just standing still. Now you can notice from this picture that those flippers are also furless, another characteristic of these eared seals. And you can also tell from this, California sea lions in other parts of the world would be called fur seals. A fur seal, sea lion, kind of tomato, tomato, depending. They behave much differently from true seals. They are more gregarious, more curious, and California sea lions have a reputation of kind of acting like dogs of the sea. So maybe in that way, they're a little more closely related in behavior to some of their ancestors. Now, if you look at the basic body plan of a seal or sea lion, what you will quickly notice is that you have this torpedo-like streamlined shape. Can't even see it here, but there is a tiny tail hidden between those rear flippers. There are no teats or genitalia visible or protruding at any time other than when they are absolutely necessary and being used. We see this similarly telescoped head. The ones, in this case, the sea lions and fur seals do have ears, but they're very, very tiny. They can flatten right up against the body there. We've got beautiful big eyes, well adapted to see underwater to magnify all of the light that is available, even at great depths. We have a nose that will close underwater, so not relying on smell underwater. Ears can also close, but the hearing is still very, very acute. And then we have these wonderfully long, impressive whiskers. Because if you think about it, the deeper you dive for your fish, the darker it gets, maybe more turbulent, maybe hard to see. So you want to have a very, very strong sense that can get your food no matter what. And those whiskers, the neurons at the base of those whiskers are so amazing that in addition to being able to feel and sense all of the currents and all of the movement of the ocean, they're also able to turn that into basically background noise and ignore it and feel unique, discrete movements of the prey. So they can actually differentiate between a swimming fish and the natural movement and current of the ocean, which I've always found to be fascinating, to have whiskers that are just that fine-tuned to basically the need they were designed to fill there. So additionally, in this lovely body plan, you've got a very, very flexible skeleton, whether you want to just lounge in a place where high surf is coming in and you want to keep your booty and your tail above the splashing surf, or you just want to itch or stretch, or maybe you get in a good arch to amplify your bark or your call. Having a very flexible skeleton when you're a creature that spends most of your time swimming the ocean is certainly a fabulous adaptation. We can also see here in the body plan that the sea lion here, which is a fur seal or eared seal, compared to an elephant seal, which is a true seal, so different families. And these are not to scale. Elephant seals can get to be up to about 9,000 pounds, so don't trust the scale here. But you'll notice that sea lions and fur seals can bring those rear flippers up under their body, making them much more agile on land, more graceful on land, able to kind of assume an almost upright sitting position. Whereas the true seals, they're flippers, the real flippers don't have that ability. They're not going to be able to rotate under the body and prop themselves up. So on land, they still have this very horizontal position. And if you notice how deep the sea lion's rib cage is, that is because it has the space, the ability due to the position it assumes on land. If you have a massive pinniped that is always going to be horizontal with its full body weight on its rib cage, then that very, very deep rib cage that the sea lion has would not be as effective in protecting the organs and in sustaining the weight that's weighing down above. Now, another thing you may notice is we've got 5 fully webbed digits on every single appendage. But if you notice when I say appendage, that's about all that's in that appendage. You look at where the elbows and the shoulders and the knees and hips and even ankles are, and they are all contained within the core of the body. Again, if we had long limbs sticking out, we'd have a lot more drag. We'd be less hydrodynamic. So all you really need are some metacarpals, metatarsals, and some phalanges that are basically the digits in that flipper that are the locomotion money. We need to be able to navigate and get around the ocean, but we don't want anything else sticking out of our body that would actually inhibit our ability to do that well. Now, additional aquatic adaptations for spending all of this time in water. You'll notice how very, very big those eyes are. So those eyes are basically adapted for underwater sight. So you're talking about circular lenses, huge pupils, tapetum lucidum, enhancing all light, gathering all light, magnifying all light deep underwater. But when you come on land, if your pupils are that big, you're going to be blinded by basic sunlight. So on land, they do constrict to very, very small pinpoint pupil, but still have fabulous eyesight on land. The ears close underwater because the last thing you want is a bunch of water in your ears, but the closing of the ear doesn't inhibit the sound. They hear very well on land. They hear even better underwater, able to determine the direction and almost triangulate the sound quite well. They can hear frequencies well above human range, which is phenomenal. And then you may also notice that the seal on the left has nostrils closed. Seal on the right has nostrils wide open. Now, we as humans tend to view everything from a very human aspect, makes sense. And since our nose or nostrils are naturally open, it's a logical assumption that the one on the right must be relaxed with a resting position. Believe it or not, the one on the left is in the resting, relaxed position. When a pinniped is fully relaxed, the nostrils will seal shut to a watertight seal. They have to flex a lot of muscles in their nose to open those nostrils to breathe. So it's very interesting that the majority of the time that you will see a seal or sea lion or even a walrus, you will actually see them with their nostrils completely shut. Now, those nostrils are valvular and they're under voluntary control. So if you think about that, that means you have to actually think and actively move muscles to open your nostrils, which creates a problem. Because how do you sleep if you have to actively, voluntarily open your nostrils to breathe? If you're asleep, then you're relaxed, then your nostrils close, and now you're not breathing. Well, there's a solution for that. So fur seals, sea lions, whales, dolphins, some birds, some manatees do what is called, look at these little closed nostrils, unihemispheric slow wave sleep. What that means is half of their brain stays awake while they sleep. that half of their brain can continue to think, oh, it's time to breathe. Let's move those muscles to open those nostrils and then relax and close them again. Half of the brain can be alert so that if an orca is swimming nearby and you're sleeping in the water, you can react to that orca and get out of the way. So half of that brain being awake allows them to relax, but still be able to think to breathe, think to react to what they're sensing in their environment. But it's not really getting a lot of REM sleep, as you can imagine. A lot of times when they do haul out on land for the breeding and reproduction, one benefit of that is some of them will actually, they can consciously decide to use their whole brain to sleep and fully fall asleep. No orcas on land, it's a safer place to sleep. Funny thing is they do studies and over 60% of them, even on land, still choose to just use half their brain and let the other half stay awake. So when this happens, using half your brain, they get less than 3 minutes of REM sleep per day, which is less than they give rats when they do sleep deprivation studies. And the really impressive thing is no pinniped has ever shown any decrease in any bodily function, reaction time, intellectual processing time due to lack of REM sleep. So obviously they are not thriving because they have lots of REM. They just are managing somehow magically without it, which is really impressive, really impressive. Humans would not fare so well. Now, yet another amazing adaptation that enables them to thrive in their aquatic environment. And yes, many of you may know this is the largest pinniped on the planet. The southern elephant, the male southern elephant seal can get up to 19 feet long and about 9,000 pounds or just shy of that. And a lot of his Jabba the Hutt-esque appearance is due to blubber, blubber, and a lot more blubber. Now that much blubber, it's got to be a fabulous adaptation, and oh my gosh, it is. So not only is it a lot of cushion and protection, it is a lot of insulation and helps with thermoregulation. It has a different density than muscles, so when he wants to float, it's easier to float. When he wants to surface, it's easier to surface. And it's a huge, huge storage of calories, so that if during breeding season he needs to stay on land and manage his harem and forego all feeding, which does happen, he has plenty of extra energy storage to tap into and will not be a waif by the time the breeding season is over. So lots and lots of benefits to that amazing blubber that all of the pinnipeds have. And if the insulating property of the blubber was not impressive enough, they've got countercurrent heat exchange, which always blows my mind. Because if you think about it, if you are in very, very cold water, which a lot of these pinnipeds are, you don't want your body to get cold. You don't want to be cold. You don't want to feel cold. You don't want to have to burn a ton of extra calories to maintain your body temperature, and you don't want to have to increase your food consumption to do that. So they manage this in a completely different way. So you'll notice in the diagram on the right here, the flipper, the blood is, the colors indicating the temperature. The blood in the flipper stays very, very, very cold. They do not get frostbite. They have no ill effects to having extremely cold flippers. And if you think about it, the movement of swimming does not get affected by the temperature of the flipper, and they're not using it for dexterous grabbing of fish or using it like we use fingers. So it's just basically a big swimmer fin. You notice the blood from the core of the body is very, very, very warm. We want the brain, the heart, the organs, the core to stay warm. So the blood in the core is warmed, and then it flows to the flipper, the fin. As it flows, the arteries going to the flipper are closely intertwined with, right up against the veins that bring the blood back. The cold blood that is coming back from the flipper steals all of the heat from the artery that is taking blood to the flipper. That ensures that all of the blood in the core of the body is always warm. If you think about it, you put something cold up against something hot, the cold thing always steals all the heat until they're at the same temperature. So it's kind of a perfect design and perfect system. You sacrifice the temperature where you certainly don't need it and retain the heat where it's the most important so that the core can stay warm no matter what. And if you look over here and you see what the temperature is of the blood in the core of the body and how much it drops as it gets to the tip of the flipper, it's really quite amazing. I, as a human, look at that and I start thinking frostbite. They, as pinnipeds, are just not affected by that. And so I'm very, very jealous. Think of all the money we would save in mittens and gloves and all of that if we didn't have to keep our hands warm. Now, all of the things we've been talking about here are thriving and managing in water. And for all of their food, all of that fish, the squid, the octopus, those are all in the water. They are going to, the pinnipeds are going to spend all day, every day, swimming and diving to get food. Now, if you want to dive to get food, you can get more food if you can stay underwater longer, if you can go deeper, if you don't have to breathe as often, if you are not using as many calories to do this. And so you want to maximize the potential of every dive. And there is an evolutionary adaptation called the dive response that has enabled all of this to happen, which is pretty remarkable. So this dive response guards against heat loss by basically not burning as many calories, not generating as much heat, not releasing as much heat at the surface. It decreases the oxygen needs, which is great because we're not going to have to come to the surface to breathe as often, and therefore maximizes the possible dive time. So how in the world is this happening? Well, the biggest thing is the bradycardia. From the nanosecond a pinniped decides, I'm going to dive underwater, it's not a conscious thing that they do in their brain themselves, but their body reacts by dropping their heart rate, sometimes so low that it's 10% of what it normally is. By dropping the heart rate that low, you drop metabolism, you drop the demand for oxygen, you drop the number of calories you're burning, you drop the amount of heat you're burning and losing, and you have basically created a situation where you conserve your own resources unbelievably well. As your metabolic rate slows, your demand for oxygen goes down, and on top of that, the blood vessels at the surface constrict so that they're not releasing as much heat. Now, when I talk about bradycardia and I say from the nanosecond a pinniped decides to dive, the heart rate reacts, this is what I'm talking about. So you notice the top graph here is the dive depth. So when we're up here, we're at the surface, and then we're diving way down, and then we go back up to the surface. So this is the dive depth. This is the heart rate. Look at the moment that the pinniped decided to dive and what the heart rate did in response. Within a second or two, the heart rate has dropped to 25, 20, 15, 12% of what it normally is. When the heart rate drops that much, we don't have demands of oxygen. We're not burning those calories. We are enabling ourselves to stay underwater longer. And then as soon as we surface, boom, heart rate comes back to full beating potential, maximizing the availability and consumption of oxygen in that moment until we decide, I'm still hungry. I think I'm going to dive again. It's really, really remarkable. Now, of course, the little harbor seal you see on the right, naturally born with a ton of adaptations to survive aquatic environments. The guy on the left, even with all of that equipment, oh, bless his heart, he needs so much help, because the little one on the right has high hemoglobin concentration. Blood can carry a ton more oxygen than ours. Has myoglobin, which means you can even store oxygen in your muscle cells. And if you can store that much oxygen in your blood and in your muscles, the last place you need or want it is in your lungs. So whereas humans, if someone said, okay, hold your breath and jump in the water, most of us would go and take a huge deep breath, inflate our lungs. It's the worst thing to do. Professional divers, free divers, do what pinnipeds do. Last thing before you jump in the water, breathe everything out of your lungs. You don't need anything in there. One, it's just going to make you float up to the top. Two, the deeper you go and the pressure on your lungs, it's going to make that air need to go somewhere. The atmosphere is 78% nitrogen. You're putting nitrogen dissolving into your tissue. You come back up to the top. That's why we all get the bends, because it came bubbling back out of the tissue. You don't need anything in your lungs. You need it where the oxygen is being used, so they exhale before they dive down, and they're just basically living off of all of the oxygen in their blood and in their muscle cells at that point. So now that we've discussed kind of some of the magical things of pinnipeds in general, let's go dive in a bit deeper into these sea lions. Now here you can see some of their characteristic things. We've got little tiny external ears that are visible. We've got rear flippers that can move up under the body and be more graceful on land. We've got fur-less front flippers, and we have claws that are not at the tip, but are about a third to halfway up the fin. So we do not have claws out here. We have claws a ways up, which means if you're going to scratch, you don't use the tip of your flipper. You're actually going to need to make a little flipper fist and scratch that way. So you're actually bending part of your flipper out of the way to get a good scratch in. The sea lions and fur seals also often look like they're flying through water. They propel themselves by using those front flippers. They're kind of just steering with the rear flippers. The locomotion is all coming from the front. You've got severe, significant sexual dimorphism. Yes, these are both southern sea lions. The male is obviously on the right, the female on the left. This is a very big dimorphism, but almost all fur seals and sea lions have a very significant sexual dimorphism. And then, of course, you have the molting, and almost all pinnipeds will go through molting. Some make it look very fashionable, and I'm going to cheat a little bit here because I'm going to bring in a true seal, because they're the ones that kind of make it look awkward and like, oh my goodness, I hope this stage passes quickly, because this is not fashionable at all. But you gotta shed that thick coat before the new coat can grow in and take its place. They are very gregarious, they are very vocal. Here we are back in Namibia seeing how gregarious, calling out in mass, talking to each other. Fur seals as far as the eye can see. As I mentioned, they do all give birth on land. The otariids, which is what fur seals and sea lions are, tend to have longer childhoods. They tend to be a little more altricial. They have longer parental care. Instead of swimming within minutes of birth, they stay on land when mom goes to forage. You'll see on the right, it's kind of like a little babysitter nursery group. And basically their mom said, okay, we'll be right back. You guys stay right here. Don't go anywhere. And they're typically very obedient. If humans do not mess with them, then moms will come back and they'll be able to nurse. The haul out that all pinnipeds do, hauling out onto land for all of that breeding and pupping, since it happens at the same time every year, it kind of gives an erroneous impression that, oh, the gestation must be 12 months exact, because this happens every year. but that's not the case. They have this amazing thing called delayed implantation. It's easiest to find a mate when everybody hauls out at the same time. So that's when the breeding takes place. That's when the egg is fertilized. But if your gestation is not 12 months, it's not a good time to start having that egg develop. So it's almost like nature hits pause. And that egg will not implant until months later, which triggered by the length of the day. The eyes receive information that trigger the hormones. The brain causes the hormones to be released. And then that egg will implant and the gestation will continue. So you may have a 7-month true gestation period, but that egg was fertilized 4 to 4.5 months before that, because everything works better if it stays on that nice annual schedule. And again, because these are sea lions and fur seals, less precocial, slower growth. And you'll notice on the map, California sea lions have no idea where California is. The dark blue is where males and females can be found. The lighter blue, the males sometimes go on very, very long migrations, walkabouts in the ocean, if you will, outside of breeding season. Now, as we jump over to the phocids, the true seals, will find some differences. Notice we are not all brown now. We've got some rings, we've got some spots, we've got some patterns. You can see on that ring seal on the right, we have claws at the tip of the flipper, no longer halfway up. So if we scratch, we want to just do it with the tip there. We swim using our rear flippers to propel ourselves. Notice the monk seal there getting in a good scratch just with the tip of those of that flipper. Here we have a harbor seal, mom and baby. We still have delayed implantation and birth on land, but this is a much shorter childhood condensed into a much shorter period of time. And the for the true seals, the little ones have underfur. The adults never do. By the time you're an adult, you've built up so much blubber that you don't need underfur. But since a lot of them are in Antarctic and Arctic environments, the little ones having that underfur is a nice additional help with thermoregulation. Now I will adjust the volume here, but if your rear flippers don't rotate up under your body, that means on land you're not quite as graceful as you would be if you were a sea lion. So they call the locomotion on land galumphing, and here's what it looks like.
Demonstrate galumphing.
And thank you to the Aquarium of the Pacific for making such a cool video of the galumphing on land. It's not the most graceful movement, but it works, and they spend most of their time in the water anyway. So it's pretty cool to watch. So these guys are the true seals, more precocial, much faster growth. Some of them are only with their mother for a matter of days before she leaves. They fatten up very, very quickly. They can swim within minutes of being born. And instead of the mom leaving them on the shore and saying, I'll be right back, mom says, I'm hungry. You're coming with me, kiddo. And the little one will be taught to swim very quickly and will be swimming with mom, not foraging because the little one nurses, but will go with mom. Sometimes you'll see them hanging on to the back in the early days, but very quickly they're swimming well and keeping up with mom. Now, this on the right, this is our youngster at the LA Zoo, Walnut. He is pretty genetically valuable. His mother is a Pacific harbor seal. His dad was an Atlantic harbor seal. Only in captivity do you get such a unique hybrid because never the twain would meet in the wild. And you can see on the map there, exclusively in the Northern Hemisphere, but very, very, very prevalent along almost all coastal regions of the Atlantic and the Pacific in the Northern Hemisphere. So one thing people don't realize is that if you are a pinniped and you live in water, you don't actually ever drink water because you don't want to drink salt water. All the moisture you need, you get from your food. And in the wild, you have a shorter lifespan than you would in captivity. But if you're not staying well hydrated, the longer you live, the more chance you have of kidney stones or other problems like that. And pinnipeds in captivity live a long time. So in captivity at the zoos, we have to trick them into consuming water because they don't naturally consume water. So at the LA Zoo, we make gelatin, non-flavored gelatin cups and put fish in them. So basically they eat fishy Jello shots. We also will use these cylindrical ice trays that are basically making cylinders of ice for water bottles. But if you take one of those and put it in a herring and feed it to a seal or sea lion, then you have tricked them into consuming frozen H2O, and you have kept their kidneys and their system healthier longer than it would have been otherwise. And of course, if you ever find an abandoned seal or sea lion, first question whether it's abandoned, because because it's by itself doesn't mean it's abandoned. It's very possible that its mother is foraging and its mother said, wait right here, I'll be back. And mom is coming back. If you notice mom never comes back or it looks injured or sick, then call the authorities. Never ever approach a seal or sea lion because that sometimes will make the mom not come back. Now, quickly jumping to your adventures next year, this is La Jolla in Southern California, not far at all from San Diego and where next year's conference will be. And if you look at this over in this area, lots and lots of people swim. They will sometimes just swim recreationally. Sometimes they will swim out to the buoys and back to train for ocean competitions and triathlons. This water is filled, literally filled with sea lions. And when I talk to the people who swim there, they say they have sea lions swimming next to them and bumping them and checking them out all the time. This is usually covered in birds and sea lions. And then a very special place, the children's pool, is way down here. So using this building as a frame of reference, let's switch our view. Here we go, looking at it from the other direction. Here's that building. This is called Children's Pool. The Scripps family, back in the 1920s and 30s, noticed that this was a very, very turbulent, rocky, coral-filled area, and families wanted to bring kids to the beach, but between the riptide and the current, it just wasn't safe. So Mrs. Scripps had people design and build this protected seawall and protecting this beach from the riptide, those strong currents, and so it became known as Children's Pool. And what it was designed for was families to bring humans to this lovely area. And that's what happened for about 50 years. And supposedly it was delightful. And so delightful that word spread, and then other families decided, you know, this is wonderful. How nice of Mrs. Scripps to build a harbor seal pupping sanctuary. And so oftentimes now when you go, you will notice it is protected. It is sometimes heavily covered, sometimes slightly covered with harbor seals, especially if you go early in the morning. Even on the rocks that are there in the little cove, you will see harbor seals and birds hanging out. It is phenomenal. It's definitely worth a trip over there. And whether you're enjoying the big male sea lions who are maintaining their territory or catching some Z's, or the females who are playing in the surf, or you're just taking in all the cormorants and the pelicans and the seals and the sea lions. The list goes on and on. The herons, everything. It is a pretty remarkable place. I suggest you visit next year if you go. So definitely rife with wildlife and sights and sounds. A really, really remarkable place. So thank you so much for letting me represent the pinnipeds today. It's been my pleasure to share some pinnipedian facts in the California sea lions and harbor seals with you guys, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are some.
Thank you, Heather. That was super interesting. I appreciate you talking with us and sharing all these facts about pinnipeds. And let me just check the chat to see if we have any questions. We have lots of compliments saying well done and thank you and awesome. So how did you start your love for these animals? Was it as a child?
My father would say it was pre-womb. I evidently arrived on the planet already as an animal lover, and when people would ask my dad if I got it from him, he said, "Oh no, no, we all got it from her. She arrived this way." So I don't remember a time when I did not um, love animals, but I think I became more enamored with sea lions and seals and everything when I moved to California. I was born in Texas and my dad was in the military, so we moved around a lot, and there are not certainly it's different wildlife on the coast of Texas than the coast of California, and I'm in Africa a lot, so the pinnipeds there as well.
Well, thank you very much. Unusually, we hear that you also love rhinos, so that's kind of awesome too.
Yes, that
Maybe
is
next
true.
year you can do a paper on rhinos. That would be wonderful.
Certainly, my pleasure.
Okay. Okay. We Joey and Marshall from Rosamond Gifford Zoo. We noticed that you have been to Africa, and her question was, for even in the United States, do the pinnipeds get along well with people in the wild, or what should you do when you encounter one in the wild?
So it's an excellent question. I would say, if someone is swimming or surfing or sailing, California sea lions are very curious, and so from that simple viewpoint, they get along. But generally speaking, it's good to always, always, always give them uh, distance, and regardless of whatever curiosity they're showing. One, they do have some powerful teeth and they know how to use them. Not that they would aggressively do something, but if they felt threatened, they certainly could. And then also, a lot of people will see seals or sea lions on the coast, especially the little baby cute ones, and want to get near them or get closer to get a good picture or go check them out. And again, it's their area for breeding and pupping, and sometimes the mother coming back from foraging will see that and abandon a baby. There are certainly places where the human wildlife conflict is, but we want this beach. No, we want this beach. And I'm a little biased because I figure if something's perfectly suited for animals, they've lost so much habitat, whatever we can give back in whatever form they can have, as far as I'm concerned, but that's just me. So, but yes, there is healthy respect is always a good guideline. There are some conflicts, but they tend to be human created, not pinniped created.
Thank you. We do have a question from Nicole at Milwaukee Zoo. Do captive pinnipeds not rely as much on their hemisphere ability due to decreased threats?
You know, it's an interesting question. The captive born pinnipeds will let both hemispheres of their brain rest more often, more fully than a wild born. There are a lot of pinnipeds in captivity that were rescued, that stranded in the wild. They seem to continue whatever pattern they had already established in the wild. And even though they can haul out and therefore they're not going to drown or have water go up their nose, there are no orcas or threats. They will still employ whatever routine they've developed. And it's interesting, if you think about it, if there's no loss of function or ability due to lack of REM sleep, as humans, we're like, oh my gosh, I want more sleep. But for them, if it doesn't affect them, there's really no incentive to change a behavior you've uh, kind of established for yourself. It's a hard thing to wrap even my head around. It's just thriving on little REM sleep.
Thank you, Heather. Nancy Gaspar noted that in Hawaii, the monk seal is protected and tourists are not allowed to be closer than 50 feet from them.
Yep. And it's a serious offense there. The Hawaiian monk seal is one of the most endangered pinnipeds on the planet. The Marine Mammal Center up in Sausalito in Northern California has a Marine Mammal Center in Hawaii that helps with the monk seal conservation and rescuing and reintroduction. And yes, no, that species is very low in number, and it's very serious, the measures they take, which is what is needed, which is great.
Thank you, Heather. I want to say thank you. We're coming to the end of our time, and we all want to say thank you to you. And I will be sharing all the compliments that are in the chat with you. This has been very much appreciated. Thank you. And AZAD will be extending an, a year-long membership to you as in appreciation, and we thank you very much. And I'd like to thank Vicky Default from Los Angeles for recommending you as one of our presenters because it's been awesome. So thank you. We appreciate it. And for everyone, I just want to go over our admin just for how we'll be doing the rest of the day. We're going to be having a break now. So we will resume at 3 p.m. Eastern time. And in the afternoon, we're going to be having a 3 p.m. presentation and a 4 p.m. presentation. And we are